Coming up today on the Locked On Hornets podcast, Charles Lee benches LaMelo in the fourth quarter in what was a close game against the Nets last night. Charles, what did you just do? We'll talk about it today, Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free. We're available anywhere you get your podcast. And that includes YouTube. Hold on, everybody. I know you're at the edge of your seat, but I got some bills to take care of. We got some people to thank. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is an app you can download today and use code LOCKEDONNBA and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Plus, your favorite podcast has a newsletter out now, and you can go subscribe to it. Introducing the Locked On Hornets Daily Newsletter. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. You can sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Hornets newsletter. There's David Walker making a weekly appearance. I'm glad that we pushed this one back from a Tuesday to a Wednesday. Wow. You are a magnet for this type of stuff. David Walker on Twitter, by the way, at David B. Walker. But now, as you can see, I guess it's official because it's under the box in which you broadcast in. Every Hornets Boxscore.com. He is one half of that. The other half is the guy in the middle of your YouTube feed, Doug Branson. Find him on Twitter at Doug Branson LOH. Listen to him on other podcasts like Locked On NBA. Also, everyhornetsboxscore.com. There, you can text him. I'm Walker Mehl. Listen to me, WFNZ, every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. Let's get to it. The Charlotte Hornets lost to the Brooklyn Nets last night in a cup game, 116 to 115. It was a tight one. The final 4 minutes, specifically the final 3 minutes and 47 seconds, LaMelo Ball does not play. The camera would pan to LaMelo for those final 3 minutes and 47 seconds, and he would look visibly frustrated, not throwing a tantrum, but he clearly wasn't happy about it. So Trey Mann is out there balling. We thought maybe Charles Lee is going with Trey because he's the hot hand. Maybe Charles Lee got frustrated with the take fouls, with the bad shot selection, the bad decision making, probably more of the latter. But it's not what Charles Lee said after the game as to why he decided to bench LaMelo in those final 4 minutes. Instead, what he said was LaMelo's been phenomenal for us. He's done so many good things, creating offensively and guarding. And then he said, I just thought that Trey had a slightly better hand tonight and was helping us a little bit more on both ends of the court. Doug, let's start with you. What are your thoughts on Charles Lee benching a player that had statistically the best fourth quarters in all the NBA this season?
Charles, I sure hope you know what you're doing because you are a first-year head coach and you just benched a player that is on a max contract, that the team is paying a significant amount of money, and a player that coming into the game was averaging more than 10 points, still slightly more than 10 points, despite scoring 0 in that fourth quarter. He's still averaging 10.3 points per game in the fourth quarter. With great shooting percentages from 2 and from 3s, 45.7% from 3. That's my main thought is I hope you know what you're doing here because despite what Charles Lee said in the press conference, I don't buy for a second that this was about Trey Mann playing better or having a hot hand because you can play those two guys together. That is not impossible. And even Eric Collins, when LaMelo went to the bench, was like, well, it looks like LaMelo's going for a brief breather because that's what we all thought. Because it was like you can't, in a close game, it'd be one thing if they were getting beaten by 10, 15. I mean, we've seen him hold LaMelo out of the beginning of fourth quarters where the Hornets were completely out of it. So that's not out of the question. But to hold him out of a game where you've got a 1 point, 3 point differential there is just really baffling. And I think, again, his comments after the game stretch credulity. And I think it leads you to believe that there might be something else under the surface here, that it might even be more than what you were talking about, Walker, the decisions that LaMelo was making within that fourth quarter, that it might be something even more.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was a horrible decision for many, many reasons. LaMelo is the king of the fourth. He has excelled in the fourth quarter, even when he's had, off nights in the first quarter through the third quarter. He's been able to provide that punch. They've won games based off of that. But when you get to the explanation, I could have bought. I didn't like a couple of those shots earlier in the shot clock. Didn't like a couple of those decisions. Didn't like a couple of those plays on defense. Ben Simmons got a couple of easy ones. Maybe got past LaMelo on a few of those plays. But to say you're benching him in favor of Trey Mann is really, really tough to buy. I mean, this is almost like if Chuba Hubbard threw a halfback pass and then Dave Canales just went with him at quarterback for the rest of the game because he had the hot hand. I mean, you can play those two guys together. Hello. That's not even the question. We talked on here. I was noting in the game, like how bumpy the offense was with Trey Mann trying to play point, in that first half there. And so I'm with you, Doug. I don't know how this feels like a crux in the season. And we finally gotten there. Charles is in charge, apparently. And, he made that decision and it's definitely a decision, guys. I don't know how you really, I don't know. The justification was not there, obviously, for me. So, you can look at it. He played, Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, 8 minutes in the second half, played 3 minutes in the fourth quarter, and he did have 4 fouls. You could have sold me on protecting him a little bit to start the fourth quarter. But holy Lord, I mean, yeah, and it is a tournament game. It's the in-season tournament. So what? But it's a game you also needed to win, I think, just to regain some sanity for this team in a game that was winnable on the road against a team that plays super hard. So I don't know. We'll see, guys. I can't imagine this is the last we've heard of this.
So you're both right. Trey Mann and LaMelo Ball can go out on the court at the same time. Charles Lee, this is not the reason he benched LaMelo Ball. It is not because he was rolling with the hot hand in Trey Mann. Trey Mann was awesome last night, especially, I guess, when we got closer to the second half. First quarter, what was he, like 1 of 6 to start the season or to start the game? But in the second half, he was balling. We've seen LaMelo and Trey play out there on the court quite a bit this season. It's a fun lineup. We like it. We probably would have liked to have seen that last night in the final minutes of this game against Brooklyn. And yet Charles Lee is telling you that he decided to roll with Trey in favor of LaMelo. So, yes, you guys are both right. That was not the reason that he decided to bench LaMelo. I also don't think it's the complete reason to bench LaMelo if you would just chalk it up to the bad shot selection, the bad defense, the take fouls. Not in this game. You don't make this type of move unless you're fed up with the areas that LaMelo struggles. You don't make this type of move in a one-game scenario, in a tight game that you would really like to win, that has at least a little added importance with it being an NBA Cup game. You don't make this type of move to your franchise player unless you're fed up with some of the mistakes that you just can't correct. So I tweeted out last night, regardless of why you think it happened, regardless of if you think it was the right decision, this is going to be a reflection point. We're going to visit this quite frequently. We're going to be visiting this a lot. And it's either going to be 10 games, 15 games, 30 games, 50 games down the road. We're going to come back to this point frequently, and we're going to say, LaMelo stopped fouling. LaMelo stopped taking those unnecessary fouls. For the most part, like, this was a message that was well received. Coach K, the bench is the best motivator. Charles Lee subscribes to it, and it worked for LaMelo. Or we're going to get the trade rumors. We're going to get the trade requests, and we're going to be like, man, this feels like it all came to a head when Charles Lee decided to bench LaMelo in the fourth quarter. We're going to come back to this point regardless of what you think and why you think it happened.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I sure hope he knows what he's doing. I sure hope he knows what he's doing, because you're right. This is a we're going to reflect on it. It's going to be a reflection point. It's going to be an inflection point in the story of LaMelo Ball's future with the franchise. Either these two are going to be able to come together and say, that Charles Lee is going to be saying, this is what I demand of you. And LaMelo Ball is going to say, okay, I hear you on those things. And also you got to hear me out on stuff, and they can come together and figure it out. Or there's going to be a split. And the question is the split going to be the franchise splitting from Charles Lee, or LaMelo Ball splitting from the franchise?
David, before you go real quickly, I do have one other point. So here we have the two opposite end of the spectrums. Either it works and LaMelo stops doing the fouling and the bad shot selection stuff and it improves, or he leaves and wants out and there's friction in the franchise. Those are two opposite ends of the spectrum. Also, the middle point matters here as well, because the middle is that nothing changes. LaMelo just continues to ball. He doesn't really care about leaving the franchise. He likes it here in Charlotte. He doesn't want to move and all that. And also, he continues to foul quite a bit and make the same decisions that he's making right now. That will be another reason that we come back to this point. And maybe the Hornets are fed up with it at that specific point. So it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't have to be one end of the spectrum or the other. It can be the middle, and we'll still come back here as this is the moment when we knew Charles was fed up with it and still nothing changed. So there's a lot of reasons as to why we'll come back to this game against the Nets.
Yeah, and I guess you can play it however you want. If you don't want to be truthful and say the real reason behind that, that's, your prerogative, and you handle it behind the scenes, I guess. You're not giving the fans and the media much credit for seeing what their eyes told them, though. When you say you took him out because Trey Mann had the hot hand, I just can't help but laugh at that. But it all comes down to you sacrifice to win. I mean, and maybe if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. This is the NBA, okay? Star players, don't get benched very often for continuing to do things that they've kept doing. Maybe he's had a conversation with LaMelo. Maybe you guys are right. Maybe, this has been all right. Do it again, and we're going to sit you out in the fourth, to which LaMelo probably laughed in his face. Okay, sure. But it's just, okay, why are you doing, if you're going to go down that road, you do it now. Like, this was hardly the worst I've seen LaMelo. He didn't have a great game, but you're going to bench him coming in the fourth quarter. That's kind of the ace in the hole. At least you got the fourth quarter, right? Maybe we can rebound. Maybe he can give us a punch. I just think that is, we'll never know. But you almost guaranteed the loss by benching your superstar, your top 5 scorer in the NBA, your leading player in the fourth quarter in the NBA and points scored. Perhaps your future all-star this year. We'll see. I'm with Doug. It's a big, big, big play by Charles Lee.
I've got lots of thoughts. I've got 3 thoughts.
Sure.
I'll let you choose which one you'd like after we get back.
I'm sure, this was not going to be a one segment type topic here on LOH. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast. Bees everywhere! Post-it notes of thoughts that he wants to share with the people. So find out what post-it note he brings to the table in the second segment of Locked On Hornets. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can get ready to tackle what is now like the last third, kind of the second half. Everything is weird with the 17-game schedule. But you can get ready to tackle all of it on NFL with the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5. You can get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Imagine Hornets fans that are on FanDuel watching last night, seeing LaMelo not play, and then you have money on the Hornets to win, and you're just freaking out. You can do that real time on FanDuel. Go there in a hurry. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. More Locked On Hornets ahead. Doug, I did not bring Post-it notes to the table. You do. Give us your first postie. What you got for us?
So I've got 3 choices for you. These are notes that I wrote down as David was talking there. My notes are, that's not the way this works, it's complicated, or if nothing changes. Walker, which one of those would you like?
Well, we kind of got that's not the way this works with David. I want to hear that it's complicated. That intrigues me the most. Tell me the nuance surrounding the situation.
Is this their relationship status? Is this Charles and LaMelo's online relationship status?
Well, it is now, for sure. But it hasn't exactly been uncomplicated from the very beginning, because at the beginning of the season, you had Charles Lee wearing LaFrance gear to the press conferences in support
head to toe
of his
the next game.
Yeah, I mean, basically a billboard for his star player. And then slowly through the games, you had little critiques come out from him after the game. Critiques of LaMelo's fouling, critiques of his shot decision-making that we just simply did not hear from Steve Clifford. And we speculated at the time that, hey, Steve's probably holding back a little bit. He probably wants to say some things, but they've got a contract to figure out. And there are NBA politics. And that's what I would say on the this is not how this works, because there were a lot of comments on Twitter that I saw about, like, yeah, of course, bench LaMelo, because look what he did in the fourth. Ugly ISO long 2 miss. He had a silly deep 3 that luckily became a Bridges 3 because of a long rebound. And then he runs the break solo, gets to the mid-paint, hoist a floater, and then flops. 4-on-5 situation for the defense, killing the Hornets there. And then he gets up after that and fouls 80 feet from the basket. So, yeah, there were situations there, but that's not how this works. In the NBA, there are politics, and when you make a certain amount of money and you're given a star label, it's not how this works, particularly with a first-time head coach. What I'm worried about with Lee are a couple of things. One, overthinking, and two, he came into this league as a head coach with a 60-win Atlanta Hawks team and then jumped from there. Now, he stayed with them through the Hawks breaking it all down, but he jumps from there to Milwaukee. He jumps when they were contending. He jumps from there to Boston, doing what Boston's doing. It's the first time that Lee, as a head coach, has been part of a situation where you're not a championship contender and you're managing personalities at the same time. And I think that's going to be an interesting situation for him. He's learning a little bit on the job.
Yeah. We also should mention he picked up a Phantom technical foul. There was a review in this game, guys, in the fourth quarter that I've never heard such verbal gymnastics that came. We could talk about the rest a little bit. It was an ugly game all around. But he cost his team. I believe the Nets made that free throw. Then I really can't remember. But he got a weird technical during a review, which. He just.
Well, they offset. I think the Hornets would have.
Those offset, I believe. Yep.
Yeah, those offset. Right. But I think the Hornets would have gotten a point, or at least an opportunity.
We'd have gotten the ball, I think. Anyway. So
it's speaking of complicated.
I mean, I'm bated breath waiting for this 2-minute report. By the way, for this game, there's not enough. There's not enough.
What's funny is that moment you're talking about. I believe that was at the 148 mark. I remember checking to see if this was going to be in the 2-minute report or if we had just missed. Saw it was at 148 and thank God, and also no, thank you. I want to read it, and also I don't want to read it at the same time. But we're going to get a breakdown of what took place with that long review.
Yeah, but it just felt like Charles Lee, for the first time, it came to a head during a game where it was just a little bit, it's in the moment's not too big for him, but between the benching and the technical foul and kind of the inability to match the Nets' physicality and some of the stuff they were doing on offense and some of the ISOs they got with a guy who's playing in his second NBA game in Watford, it wasn't the best game for anyone. Brandon Miller looked good. Trey Mann looked great, but from the two main guys, Charles Lee and LaMelo, not the finest outing, I don't think, for either one.
Doug, you touched on the relationship. It's complicated. Charles Lee, this is all new to him. I will say what's very different about this decision to bench LaMelo in the fourth, this didn't come down from ownership. Ain't no way. So you now have some freedom with your head coach. I can't put Schlotkin to task for meddling in basketball operations right here, because I can't imagine it's good business to say, yeah, let's sit that guy for the final 4 minutes of the fourth in a game that they could have won with NBA Cup implications on the line. go ahead, Charles. You have our blessing. In fact, maybe you should do it. No, they're not meddling in that regard. So I just wonder what that conversation looks like. What's the convo like between Jeff Peterson and Charles Lee? What's the conversation like between Schlotkin and Charles Lee? And maybe they don't have one right now, but I'd imagine that there's a little talking going on. Look, the other thing too is LaMelo, Steve Clifford said all last year, and I mean, even James Borrego, the coaches that LaMelo has had, they've all seemingly legitimately liked LaMelo. They've always talked about how he is coachable in film review, that he understands it. He takes it. He's not fighting back. I don't know if that's the case here between Charles and LaMelo. I don't know if Charles is putting LaMelo to the test. Do you feel like, even if it is, I don't want to say unprecedented, but it's infrequent that this happens. We don't see the stars get benched in the final minutes of games. We do not see it. You're not wrong about that. But just because it's rare, does that mean that LaMelo is going to respond so terribly to it, to the point where he's so angry he wants out, or you're going to see it visibly? Like, I think Charles isn't using this as malice because he hates LaMelo. I don't think he's doing this out of malice. I think this is the way that Charles feels like he needs to get the best out of his basketball team. I would have played LaMelo. I would have played LaMelo and Trey out there. I didn't think that it was so egregious that you sit him for the final 4 minutes. But if LaMelo actually stops doing the foul thing and maybe makes some better decisions, or it gets better and better and you can see the progress being made, then we're also going to have to come back to this game and say, all right, Charles, you did the thing. Like, you did the thing that nobody thought you would do. And if you want different results, you got to do something different. You know, because you're right. 60-win seasons all across the board for Charles. He knows what it looks like. We don't. So maybe this is the move to get things going. But it's something I wouldn't have done. I know that.
Well, listen, not that we needed this to know that this was a player development season, that this was a player evaluation season, that this wasn't. I mean, the owners have almost said it explicitly, saying this was the second inning of a 9-inning ball game in terms of building an elite franchise. But I think this was officially the moment where it's like, okay, it's obviously not about winning every single game. Because if it was about winning that particular game on that particular night, then you play LaMelo and then you beef after the game. You say, listen, maybe we got out of it. And maybe that's what Lee really didn't want to happen. Maybe Lee did not want to.
Maybe they've already done it. That's the thing.
Accidentally win that game.
Well, maybe they've already done that very thing, though. Like that LaMelo just plays and then they beef after the game and it's not working. Right?
Maybe.
Like
that's what I said at the beginning. This feels like there's something else happening that we're not seeing. Because, like, again, I look at that fourth quarter, and there were moments, but he also made good plays. And he made good plays in the first half, and he was part, and he's been a part, he's changed his game a little bit from the beginning of the season to now, where I thought he was pressing a little bit. Now he's finding guys, particularly in the first quarter. He was a big part of the reason Josh Green and Brandon Miller and Miles Bridges have all gotten it going to begin games. But it's this late game decision making that I think, and maybe something else that we're not seeing that's a factor here. And I agree with David. I don't think this is the last that we're going to hear about it. And to your point, Walker, if things don't change, that's a very real possibility. We could just go back and LaMelo plays in the fourth quarter for the rest of the way, and the bad decisions are made, and he's frustrated. But if things don't change, eventually the franchise has to come to some kind of idea about, do you want to do this thing the way Charles Lee wants to do it, or do you want to keep LaMelo? I hope it doesn't get to that place, but if things don't change, that's where we're heading.
There was one other instance I can think of where we saw a little bit in game of a demonstrative act from Charles Lee, and it's when it was another, I can't remember what game it was, but LaMelo came to the bench. He was going to the bench. Charles Lee stopped him.
Grabbed him.
Yeah, specifically said, looked like, be like, you can't, basically, I don't know what he said, but basically, can't do that. We can't blah, 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 foul or whatever. That was the only other time. But like, that's what also tells you this has been an ongoing conversation. Obviously, they're trying to rein it in a little bit. I just,
I can't stress enough that moment that you're talking about and this moment. I can't stress enough to folks who are just now paying attention to the Hornets how that has not happened his entire career with Charlotte. Through Borrego into Clifford, like this is just not something that happens, particularly this early in the season. So that's why it's unprecedented. And that's why I say I hope he knows what he's doing in terms of Charles Lee, because I don't know where this goes. This is kind of rare territory for the Charlotte Hornets.
And it's just an odd time to do it, man, because look, forget the fact that my bold prediction was the Hornets would be in Vegas, and that's out the window for the most part. But I mean,
Cancel the flight.
I don't know if those guys, but I mean, technically there's money on the line in these games, right? For all these players. If they advance to Vegas far enough, and win the thing, there is money. I don't know how much that comes up in a locker room when you look those guys in the eyes and say, hey, yeah, we just took out the best player, maybe cost ourselves a win and a chance to kind of rebound in this tournament thing. That's probably way down the list on things. But again, that was the situation. That was the game they were in. It was a winnable game. And you take out the best player in the fourth. So, there's going to, the media pool, practice, all that stuff's going to be fascinating. I guess Charles Lee is running this, though, a little bit more buttoned up than maybe I had thought, just based on outward comments, right? Like it doesn't look like it's going to be a Missoula type interaction. I mean, he's very calm, he's very collected in the post game, but that was just total BS. That answer was none.
But this is why it's complicated, because I think Lee is looking at this situation not like LaMelo as the max player and the star player and the guy that we've invested in. He's probably looking at it like, LaMelo's never been in a playoff series. He's never there's nothing on his resume other than an all-star that he backed into. There's nothing on his resume that would signal like, this is a player that I just can't hold accountable for mistakes that are made on the floor if this is a player evaluation season, if each win doesn't really matter.
He played the 7th most minutes last night. Just looking at it, the 7th most. Yeah. All right, Charles. We'll see what happens from here. Coming up next on the Locked On. Coming up next, Locked On Hornets.
Bees everywhere.
More of the game, more of what happened. Maybe we even have more LaMelo thoughts, because it is fascinating what happened last night. Stick around, find out what's coming up next, because I don't know. All still to come. LOH. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars. That's with a B, billions of dollars in award winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. Just join over 10 million users and sign up today. That's how you know it's popular. Prize Picks invented the flex play too, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Prize Picks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When your picks hit, you can get your money in as quick as 15 minutes. Prize Picks also now offers Venmo for quick and easy deposits and withdrawals into your account this sports season. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. More Locked On Hornets ahead. Where do you want to go from here? Any more LaMelo thoughts, or do we want to go with just how terrible this game was to watch, with the officials blowing the whistle every single chance they could get? A lot of the calls were wrong. By the way, I would think if you were to put all of the bad calls on a scale, I think the Hornets, the bad calls against them probably outweigh what happened against the Nets. I don't know if there's much probably to it, but there were terrible calls made against both teams. The out of bounds challenge that kept the basketball with Miles.
I've never seen anything like that. I've never seen one that's more clear. I was like, well, I don't know who was guarding Miles, but he wasn't anywhere close to the ball.
I mean, unreal. That was honestly like, look, we know the poor officiating that we've seen in Hornets games. We can go back to the Celtics game that was so poorly officiated, which was also led by James Williams' crew. Not so good when you see those guys reffing a Hornets game. Not so good at all. But this one was tough. Doug, what did you think about the officiating?
I thought that wherever the Nets stashed the referees before the game must have had a gas leak. I mean, because again, I don't even I don't know what they were doing. They look confused a lot of the time. And it was a brutal thing to watch. I don't know that this game was about the officiating in terms of why they lost, because you look at this Nets team and Cam Thomas doesn't even play in this game. They're down two of their better scorers. They're down a bunch of centers. This was a game, and you started so well. You almost had a 20-point lead, I think, at one point in the first half. It's a game you absolutely should have won, and the Nets turned up the on-ball defense and the physicality, and you had several altercations between Brandon Miller and Ben Simmons, and I just think, like, they got punked. I mean, that's just sounds like simple, but, like, I just feel like the Nets said, all right, you hit us with that first punch. We're going to come back at you and turn up the defensive temperature. And then the Hornets reacted by turning the basketball over, by not being able to pass. And look, not having a center hurts. What you can double, you can blitz, you can turn up the ball pressure. And if there's not a guy you can throw over the top two that you're confident can catch the basketball in some tough passing situations, that's going to hurt your ability to execute offense. But the Hornets failed that test. And then I think worse, they could not then respond with the same level of defensive intensity. They couldn't respond, I think, honestly, with just the same, whatever Ben Simmons and Watford and all of them had cooking in terms of the confidence, in terms of the physicality. They just couldn't match it. They got punked.
Yeah, and Cam Johnson was drilling threes. What do you have, 34 last night? I thought he was going to go for 40 at one point because he could not miss. But yeah, I mean, if you want to see how to play without a center, they run that tape back on the Nets. Now, I guess they have a center in Ben Simmons. I've never seen they don't play off. You don't play off of like Embiid as far as they play. You don't play off of Ayton. You don't play off of any backup center in the league as far as they laid off of Ben Simmons when he had the ball up front. But you know what else? He found ways to get around the rim and tip a few in that could have swung the game. And look, the Hornets did come back. They did fight back on offense and take a lead late and make it competitive, obviously a winnable game, as we've said. But totally, you see why Jordi Fernandez was, at the top of the list on coaching hires this year. That team plays super hard. You knew when they were up 17, it probably wasn't going to stay that way. They had to feel out playing without Cam Thomas, and then Cam Johnson came in and supplied those threes. I mean, who was Watford backing down on a couple of those? Josh Green? It shouldn't matter. I don't know. I mean, they couldn't stop him. And so that's what I mean on a couple of those adjustments. But yeah, on some of that, the refs allowed the Nets to get super handsy, super aggressive, but that's how the game was being called, and I thought they let a few of those things go on a little too far. They had no control over the game at all. Trey Mann got a completely bogus taunting foul.
Oh yeah, that was weak.
When he dunked. That was weak. They let him chirp a lot. Brandon Miller and Simmons, as you mentioned, getting into it. So just a lot of stuff the Hornets had to fight through, and for the most part, they kind of did, but they just did not respond to that physicality well enough and let that barrage of threes and that big lead go away.
Charles Lee did mention this. I do agree with him here in the post-game press conference where he said guys just hit threes for them. I mean, Jalen Wilson knocked down some big shots. Yeah. So did Cam Johnson. It was Jalen that hit a couple late. It was almost Jared McCain-esque when you felt, oh, perfect. This is exactly the guy that I want shooting from deep on these moments. Right. Jalen Wilson now on the list along with Jared McCain in what was his 8th career game in the association. Yeah. But it was
Ty Jerome.
Give me Ty Jerome too. We can play this game all day long.
Trenches.
When you have these guys that are taking the shots that you would want those guys to take those shots in those moments and they knock them down, that's tough to swallow. Charles told you, we threw a bunch of different defenders at Cam Johnson. It didn't matter. He's so tall. He's such a good shooter coming off screens, quick enough trigger. I don't know what you do with some of those 3-pointers unless you're just over. Right. That's the thing with Cam, but it's tough when those guys hit shots late the way they did.
No, that's what you can control is all about. You can't control when a guy like that is getting those shots up and knocking them down. What you can control, and I thought what killed them, particularly in the middle of the game, was not going under on screens like getting over on these screens, because so here's what's happening. They are dropping a ton, particularly like when Grant's in the game, he's dropping a ton, and it's not just on Giannis and it's not just on Ben Simmons. They're just playing drop coverage a ton because they don't have any centers. That's the way they've decided they're going to protect the rim. The only way that in the NBA today that you can survive that without giving up a ton of three-point shots is by aggressively going over every single screen and trying to disrupt ball handlers. That takes energy, that takes effort, that takes focus. And what you saw from, it was from LaMelo, from Miles, you can go down the line. There were several players who were just going under on these screens, and the Nets were having a field day in the middle of the game. And then the other thing was letting Dennis Schroeder just abuse you 1v1. That's on the scouting report. The Trent Watford. Yeah, whatever this guy's name is. I don't know. He's played like 2 games in the association. Exactly. That's not on the scouting report. But what is on the scouting report is Dennis Schroeder knows how to drive the basketball. You got to stay in front of him.
No, for sure. And
frustrating. This is a frustrating game on a lot of different levels.
So the final things here, looking at the stat line, one thing we should do, unfortunately, it's not the storyline. It's nowhere near to even being close to the top storyline. Brandon Miller played well. 29 points for Brandon, bounced back, 11 of 17. He was 5 of 9 from 3-point range. So not only did he get it going from distance on maybe even a little less volume than what we're used to seeing, but not much, he actually hit his 2-point shots. So what was it? If we do the math, he hit 6 2-point shots, and he did that on 8 attempts inside the arc. So nice job from Brandon. 4 assists early in this one too, which was nice. Couple turnovers. Sometimes I still have issues with the ball handling stuff, but overall, what are you going to do? That's a good game from Brandon. That's exactly what you want. And they just weren't able to get the dub because of all the stuff that we talked about in the first 2 segments.
What you do is, if you're Brandon Miller, you got to get in the lab in this next offseason and figure this ball handling thing out. I don't know that it's something that you can figure out in the middle of a long season, but he's got to get better at handling the basketball. But you saying Brandon Miller reminded me of something, and that's the altercations with Ben Simmons that you were mentioning, David, particularly that first one. Where's the rest of the team? I know that Miles went up in that second one, but where's the rest of this team? That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about they're getting punked. They're getting punked out there. Let's have some pride. Go find your teammate when he's in a situation like that. What's going on?
Yeah, and I think they came to his not rescue, but they came to have his back on another one, I think. But yeah, that's a perfect Grant Williams spot, right? You got to come in and chest bump somebody. And look, Ben Simmons is a large man. Yeah, maybe he wasn't in there. Ben Simmons is huge. And when he's out there guarding LaMelo, you can see just how, svelte and kind of slight LaMelo is, even for as tall as he is. But man, that is
Ben Simmons. Get out of here. The only shots that he takes is when the whistle blows.
But he wants to, and make no mistake about it, he wants to get out of here. Have you ever seen 2 different personalities in an altercation? Brandon Miller going at Ben Simmons and Ben Simmons backing away. I'm not trying to say that Brandon Miller was going to destroy him, but I know Brandon Miller certainly felt like he was going to destroy him, and Ben Simmons seemingly did not want any of those problems. Maybe you could just chalk it up to maturity, but also we know the messenger here. We know the context. It's Ben Simmons, so probably not. Brandon, that's what he does. He doesn't back down from anybody. That's what you love about Brandon Miller. I honestly, on that altercation, I think Brandon overreacted, and I love it at the same time.
On the first one or the second? Because the first one, I thought Brandon was like, nah, I'm not, whatever.
The Ben Simmons tap, the Ben Simmons when he's going over to the sideline, and then he bumps into Brandon, but it really wasn't all that much, in my opinion. Brandon just wasn't having it. Either way, I loved it. Even if it was a slight overreaction, in my opinion, I loved it because he was right in Ben's face saying, hey, don't do that. Don't do that. Yeah. So, and man, they lose shooting 55% from 3. Goodness gracious.
It's a wake-up call game. It should be a wake-up call game. Just take all the LaMelo stuff out of it. This should be a wake-up call for the entire team. No team in the association except the Washington Wizards are going to roll over and give you a game.
God, they hit 23s. They hit 23s last night, and Brooklyn just couldn't miss, and
Well, they had their best first quarter of the season, probably. They were scorching, and maybe they let their foot off the gas a little bit. But I think you do have to give Brooklyn credit, and that they clawed their way back. they imposed themselves on this game defensively, right, on the ball and all that stuff. I mean, the turnovers, obviously, we mentioned it briefly, but I think what the Hornets had gotten away the last 2 games with like 10 turnovers, and I think they went for at least 21 last night. So
21,
yeah, so 21 turnovers. That's your that's your scale tipper right there. You know what I mean? And LaMelo was involved in a lot of those, but not all of them. So there's a toughness that I think we've seen from this team. I think they're a lot tougher than they have been in terms of just staying in games, battling back. But that was a different type of toughness and not necessarily all muscle last night. There was a lot of mental toughness, that the Hornets, I think, to your point, Doug, are going to have to kind of bring into their game, because the Nets were absolutely trying to punk them. I don't think they got all the way there, but they frustrated them enough in that the Hornets just could not wrap their hands around anyone's neck. No, to wrap their hands around.
Don't do that. That's going to get you a suspension.
Yeah. Don't do that. They couldn't call their way back.
Every time I look at the box score, I resuscitate the pod, so I'm going to stop. I just exited out of everything, and we're going to end it there. That'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Hornets. What a doozy. There's David Walker.
Back tomorrow.
Yeah, we're going to be back. That's the thing about this whole shindig. We're back. We're daily. Every single morning, we're dropping a pod in your podcast feed, wherever you get your pods, and that includes YouTube. Big thanks to David Walker. Lucky you on the scheduling, man. You got to give all your thoughts on the LaMelo benching. Find him, more of his thoughts, on Twitter, at David B. Walker, and his write-ups on everyhornetsboxscore.com. The other half of everyhornetsboxscore.com is Doug Branson, also the host of Locked On NBA. You can text him by finding his text information on his Substack as well. Follow him on Twitter, Doug Branson, LOH. I'm Walker Mehl. Listen to me, WFNZ, every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. Sports Radio 92.7 FM. That'll do it. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day.